Welcome on in, golf fans. It is Players Championship Week. It's the fifth major, as some call it, and really looking forward to breaking down TPC Sawgrass, the venue for this week, with our course breakdown video. Going to cover what you need to know heading into DFS or on the prop side or outright betting perspective to help you with your research and get you started for trying to identify your top plays. We'll go through some of the course specifics, then we'll go hole by hole, giving you a real idea of what these players are going to be facing, and then towards the end, we're going to focus on those key stats and some of the comp courses around the PGA Tour that you can use to identify your top plays. I was out there at the API, got the hat there on site that you see I have on, and it was an absolute blast. I couldn't have asked for a better ending. I wish that Rory or Jordan Spieth would have won, but still Kurt Kitayama, well deserved. I played him in DFS, so was solid from the ROI there, solid for Showdown, especially when it came to the return on investment. And then, of course, on the prop side, be paid for our trip on Sunday. Ended up going absolutely nuclear over there on Underdog, so that was all an extra boost too. So looking forward to this week, hoping to go out there, get similar kind of results, and hopefully pay for our trip once again. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get this thing rocking with our course breakdown. Alrighty guys, TPC Sawgrass up there in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. It is the PGA Tour headquarters and one of, if not my favorite courses in all of the world. You've got yourselves some water volatility, your typical Florida windy conditions from day to day. And last year, we really got the cream of the crop when it came to the weather. That, of course, a little bit sarcastic. We hardly got the tournament in there Monday afternoon. And this time around, it looks like Friday through Sunday, there's at least a 50% chance of rain. So might be a little bit of a slogfest. I'll certainly be bringing my rain gear out, but it's really your quintessential Florida course. You've got water on, let's see, 17 holes out of 18, so water to be had pretty much everywhere. You've got yourself the Island Green, one of the hardest tee shots in all of golf there on 18 with the water the whole way down the left. Cam Smith didn't even get it on his tee shot. In fact, on his layup into 18 after missing far right, because that's where it got him with the water. So whether you're on your second shot, it's one of the better second shot golf courses on the PGA Tour, but also one of the more difficult driving tests. So when we look at the stats later, we're really looking for those top tier ball strikers, not even really tee to green play. Around the green is actually one of our most important stats, but more than anything, it's all about the off the tee play and the approach play, which you would think would put some of the top tier players at the top of the leaderboard, and that is exactly what we've seen. Think of our past champions, right? Cam Smith, Justin Thomas, Rory McIlroy over the last few years. It's just a top tier guy after top tier guy winning here. And if you look at the top 5 to 10, it's that same kind of trend. So while you're looking for those top tier ball strikers, the cream is really going to rise to the top. Because there is so much water out there, you're going to see some of the top end guys eject, miss the cut here. In fact, over the last 6 starts, Xander and Cantlay have missed the cut all 6 times. Jordan and Tony Finau have missed the cut in 11 of their 13 starts here. So just because you're a top tier ball striker, just because you're somebody that's top 5 in both of those shots gained categories, does not guarantee that you're going to make it to the weekend. So it's an interesting one at that. You kind of got to survive that chaos over the first day or so. And then by the time Sunday comes along, you're going to see those top tier players funneling their way towards the top. And after Thursday, after Friday, you're going to get a few wacky names up there. I mean, I'm thinking Artaban Lahiri last year, right, was your leader, I believe, after 3 rounds, was in the lead towards the beginning there on Sunday. But when the 72nd hole comes around, right, whether it's a Cam Smith, JT, Rory, Ricky Fowler, Webb Simpson, I mean, let's look at some of the past champions. Hideki, Rory again, Siwoo, Jason Day, right, Tiger Woods, Martin Keimer, Matt Kuchar, right, all of these prolific winners. You're not going to get somebody at like 200 to 1 that wins this golf tournament. I think Siwoo Kim was probably the highest odds of anybody on that list when they went out there and hit their outright number. It's typically going to be somebody that's 30 to 1 or lower and one of these top tier major championship type of players. In terms of some of the specifics, it is a par 72. It is 7,275 yards, so about average in terms of its length. It's not a short course, but it's certainly also not a longer course. The greens on average are 5,500 square foot and are hit at a 66.6% rate, which is about 1.6% lower than your PGA Tour average. So despite being relatively small, you actually see quite a few greens getting hit around here when you consider the size of the surfaces. When you're talking about about the fairways, they are 30.7 yards wide on average and hit at a 64.6% rate, which is also just slightly below the tour average of 1.4% below them. So when you consider the ball striking numbers, kind of similar to a PGA National and also, kind of in line with what you saw at the API, you would expect this course not to be all that difficult, but all three courses, right, play over par. This track, in fact, played 0.62 shots over par last year. Now, considering the weather, the slog they had for pretty much Friday through Monday morning, also some of the really windy conditions they had there on Saturday morning, this scoring average a little bit higher than what we're used to seeing at the Players Championship. But the reason why this scoring average, it doesn't really reflect the ball striking difficulty is because of all of the water in play, right? When you miss around this track, you're going to be penalized heavily. In fact, when you miss a lot of the greens around TPC Sawgrass, you're in water, right? You're going to be penalized not just like half a stroke to a stroke like you might around the green, but sometimes a stroke and a half to 3 strokes in terms of your penalty. So it's really an execution test, right? The players that can keep it in play off the tee, hit the most greens, you're going to see at the top of the board. And though some of the around the green shots around here are some of the most difficult on tour, the rough can be a little bit gnarly. You have a lot of side hill lies. This is a Pete Dye design and a Pete Dye specialty out here, where he's pretty much going to penalize you to the furthest extent anytime you miss a green. You don't really focus on that because really the name of the game is to not miss to begin with. And you've seen that in terms of your leaderboards. Sure, Cam Smith, one of the more creative around the green players, and we'll talk around the green a little bit later. It's important, I think, for separating yourself once you get to the top. But to get to the top, right, it was guys like a Paul Casey, Keegan Bradley, Russell Knox, Harold Varner III last year, JT, Doug Gim. First off, just a bunch of live guys, right? But ball strikers, Victor Hovland, Adam Hadwin, Sepp Straka, Max Homa, Keith Mitchell, Terrell Hatton, Daniel, all of these guys. And I know this field, right, has all these top-end players, but they're all ball striking specialists, all guys that consistently gain in those tee to green categories, and not a surprise that they flooded themselves towards the top of the board. So that's really what we're looking for around this track. A few other things to note, the greens here are a base layer of Bermuda, just like the rest of the course. So whether it's the tees, the fairways, the rough, all of it is a base layer of Bermuda, but all of it has some type of overseed this time of year up there in the Jacksonville area. And greens are a Poa trivialis overseed. The approaches, so the fairways, are a Poa trivialis overseed with some ryegrass mixed in. And your rough is a Champion Fine ryegrass. So no Poa that's mixed into the rough out there. And the rough is listed at 3.5 inches this week, which is actually significantly longer than what we've seen in the past. And just, from my experience of going to the players, there's usually patches that are closer to the 3.5 inch mark, and then patches that are closer to like 1.5, 2 inches. So luckily, we're not going to have to guess this week. I will be on site there on Wednesday, walking there during the Pro-Am. So I'll be able to give you guys an idea of exactly how they're doing the cut, right? How the rough is going to look around Ponte Vedra. But just based on what we've seen over the years, there's going to be patches that are a little bit gnarlier than the others, and players are going to be well aware of that before the week. Just thinking off the top of my head, I know hole number, I believe, 6 to the left side. It's a huge side hill and some of the gnarliest rough on property. There's just spots on your yardage book that you're going to have to X out as a player and make sure that you're missing. And with that in mind, knowing that this course is an absolute gem, let's take a look at this hole by hole and get an idea for what these players are facing. Hole number 1 here, not quite the handshake that these players would be hoping for. It's only 428 yards, but this tee shot is among the most demanding in all of the golf course, honestly. To the left over here is absolute jail. You miss in this hugely dense pass of trees, you're at best going to be chipping out sideways. You miss to the right, well, you might end up in this bunker that's penal, or you might end up in this rough that is, again, one of those gnarly patches that they purposely leave a little bit longer out there. So either way, it's a little bit more difficult than most imagine. I'd say most players are going to hit something like a driving iron or a 3-wood off the tee here. Just try and get it in the fairway, get your day started a little bit more calmly than it would be if you miss here. If you take a driver, you are going to bring potentially this bunker into play. You can see 330 yards gets you just about 15, 20 yards short. But for players like Rory McIlroy, you've seen JT, Dustin Johnson a few years have actually drived it into this bunker, which makes it an extremely dicey shot. Let's look, right? Because if you get it into the bunker, you're looking at that 75-yard yardage and go to a pin. And if it's a front pin, right, and you're dealing with that, let's see. Let's put the pin right here on the front there. It's a 50-yard, 60-yard bunker shot, which is one of the most difficult shots in all of golf, let alone there in your first hole. Hole 2 is 535, so you do get a par 5 look right away, but another tough tee shot to get it in the fairway. You miss to the left, you're 100% laying up down there in front of the water. You miss to the right, you're probably laying up over here to the left fairway, leaving yourself a wedge in. If you get it in the short stuff, you're going to be left at about 250 yards to one of the larger greens on property, but also one of the harder greens to putt. There are just so many humps and hollows in hole number 2 that even if you get on the surface in 2, it's not really a guaranteed birdie. So if you're up here greenside in 2, it's one of the more difficult around the green shots in all of the PGA Tour. So yeah, hole 2, it's reachable, but it's not nearly the guaranteed birdie look that it would be on other courses at just 530 yards. Hole 3 is 183 yards. It's also one of the more difficult greens to putt. So much like 2, it's a relatively large surface, closer to 7,000 square foot, but it's really tiered. The backside is a lot higher than the front, so everything is sloping from back to front. And there's also a lot of side slope. You miss in one of these bunkers. This front bunker is more aesthetic than anything, right? You're not really going to miss 20, 30 yards short, at least for these tour pros. You miss over here in this boomerang bunker. These shots down green, downhill are extremely difficult. And if you miss to the right over here, this pine straw makes it extremely difficult to get your contact correct. So lots of bogeys to be had at hole number 3 if you don't hit that surface. Hole 4 is another shorter par 4, but still a little bit tricky because of the water in front of the green. You can see that there's a canal running the whole way along the green surface, and anytime they have a left side pin, you're going to see a lot of players try and draw it off the right side and use some of the contouring because the entire green has a slope that runs from right to left. So if they do have like a back left pin, you can try and run it from like the front right to the back left with a running draw of sorts, but you really just take par here and move on. It's not nearly as easy a hole as you would think for like a 400-yard par 4. If you do end up hitting it close, of course, you can go out there and make a birdie. It's just you're usually bringing in a lot of risk to hit it there between the 5 to 10 foot range. Hole 5, one of the more difficult holes on property. In fact, this is actually the tee shot that I was thinking about before, so it's not hole number 6, it's hole number 5 here, where there's this massive hill to the left, and it's all sloped from left to right, and this rough over here is the deepest on property. If you end up over here, it's almost a guaranteed bogey, or at the very least, you're going to have to make a significant par putt, right, to try and get out of there with something less than a bogey. But this water to the left, if you're really aggressive off the tee, some of the longer hitters have hit it into there before. You have OB down the left with the driving range. You have the water to the right. This fairway bunker is actually probably the best place to miss. So if anything, I think the play here is just start it down the left center of the fairway and fade it, right? If it ends up only fading just like a little buttercut, sure, you're in the fairway, fantastic. If you slice it into the fairway bunker, then so be it, because I'd much rather be there than the left side, which is almost a guaranteed bogey. Or, of course, right, you don't want to wipe it right? You don't want to end up in the water, but it's a tough hole, that's for damn sure. Hole 6, water down the left, another hole that's going to get plenty of doubles, triples, sometimes even a quad bogey or two, because if you end up hitting it in the water down here to the left, you either have to drop on the slope or sometimes in the bunker, depending on where the red line is. So this is, one of the harder tee shots if you're somebody that moves it from left to right, and because to the right, there's no bailout. That's the thing about TPC Sawgrass, right? There's water to one side, and then to the right, the trees aren't sporadic, right, where you can try and hit recovery shots onto the green. They're as dense as literally it can get. I mean, these trees up here in the Pontevedra swamp have been here for hundreds of years. So you're looking at layup every single time you hit into those, unless you're just going for the absolute hero shot, which could go sideways really quickly. Hole 7's another par 4, 450, water the whole way down the left. You got the trees down the right. So a difficult angle off the tee, one of the larger greens on property, but anytime you get one of the large greens out here, it's typically one of the more sloped greens, and that's also the case with hole 7. Hole 8 is the most difficult par 3 on property. In fact, it's the most difficult hole on property at 237 yards. It's a relatively large surface like most of the par 3s, but if you miss this green, you are screwed. And again, it's 237 yards, so it's hard to hit this surface. I believe in terms of GIR percentage, it was the lowest hit green last year at the 2022 Players. Pretty much no matter where you miss, it's really difficult to get up and down. Hole 9 is 589. You're not going to see many players get home in 2. In fact, last year, I think only a handful got home in 2 the entire week. You can be a little bit more aggressive than you see here on, the Pro Visualizer. You can take it down to this corner like some of the elite tier drivers. That, of course, brings this water to the right in play and the trees to the left in play. So you have to be long and accurate to pull that off, but even doing so leaves you 250 yards slightly uphill around some massive trees on the corner here, which might not look like a big factor from this overhead view, but they completely obstruct your line. In fact, if you try to hit a 3-wood directly on line to the pin, it is going to get gobbled up by these trees. There's no possible way, unless maybe Rory McIlroy nukes it straight over them, that you're going to get it over it with something like a fairway wood. So to get it on the green in 2, you have to sling a draw around the corner, which with something like a 3-wood is really difficult thing to do, especially to be precise and do that. Hole 10 is 422, so if anyone's going to start on the back 9, it's just as difficult as the front. You got the fairway bunker on the left side now as opposed to the right side. One of the larger greens on property, but also one with a ton of slope. So yeah, there's no easy holes out here. I guess the par 5s are as close as they get. You're going to have to buckle up for all 18. There's no handshakes out here. Hole 11, like hole number 2, is a par 5, so it's a similar setup. In fact, I think it's the same exact setup on both 9s when it comes to the par. Something that Pete Dye does at a lot of his tracks. You will see a few players get home in 2 here, but it is a risky shot, right? If you're in the fairway, you can go for it. If the wind isn't so bad, you will see some guys get home in 2 and maybe eagle, but if you're dealing with the headwind, if you're dealing with, a rough lie, something like there, the fairway bunker, most will either lay up here to the left, or you're going to see a lot of guys lay up here to the right. So you can see they have the target 2 over there. I don't really agree with that. A lot of people are going to be laying up towards this side. At least that's what I've seen over the years. So keep that in mind for hole 11. Hole 12 is 370. This is potentially drivable. In fact, Pete Dye did not set it up this way to begin with. It was closer to 450 yards. This is one of the better birdie looks on the entire course, but most players are going to lay up, so most players aren't going to make this a drivable par 4 just because of the risk of it, right? There's water to the left, which of course is horrible. You want to avoid that at all costs, but also this rough to the right is extremely long, and also some of the recovery shots are some of the most difficult on the PGA Tour. Hole 13 is 185 yards, so one of the shorter par 3s, but you do have water to the left here, and it's more exposed to the wind than pretty much every other shot on property. So if it's going to be windy, this hole plays especially difficult. And hole 14, also one of the most difficult holes on property, and this really doesn't have the water in play. The water to the left is kind of a little bit too far out of the picture here, but to the right, everyone bails out. Everyone bails out on this hill, and this is another massive slope. This is probably like 15, 20 yards above the rest of the green there. It's some of the most gnarly rough on property. So if you end up missing to the right over here, good luck trying to save par. It's going to be an extremely difficult task. Hole 15 is 467 yards. It's a dogleg from left to right. One of the larger fairways, so if, you can be accurate off the tee here with a 3-wood or a driver, you should have a birdie look. But like every other hole on property, you've got to be pinpoint accurate or you're going to be in deep shit. Hole 16 is 528, so the shortest of the par 5s, but this one has the water the whole way down the right? This is the iconic stretch here at the Players where everyone's going to be watching over the weekend, myself included, and a risk-reward hole if you've ever seen one. You can definitely get home in 2. You can actually hold this green in 2, but you can see the water creeps the whole way around the back of the green, so if you overshoot the green, you're going to be in the water. And this to the right, of course, you're in the water, so expect a lot of bailouts to the left. Hole 17. We finally made it, right? The island green out there at the Players. There's going to be huge grandstands, huge, build outs surrounding this hole. And one of the, I don't really have to tell you much about 17, right? It's the 2-tiered green. The back is much higher than the front. The front middle pin location's like devilish. Front back right is what they're going to use there on Sunday. It's a fun hole to post up on. I'll be there for a lot of the week. If you want to catch up with me, say hi. And then finally, hole 18 is 462 yards, dogleg from right to left. You have the water the whole way down the left side, which of course causes issues. And Cam Smith last year wanted nothing to do with the water, right, and wiped it to the right. Ended up below these trees, and like I mentioned earlier in the video, he laid up in the water, right, trying to get it back in the fairway here. So this is a difficult tee shot no matter which way you do it. You have to go out there and execute, right, whether you're fading it from over the water back onto the fairway or hitting a slinging draw down the contours of the hole. If you can get it in the short stuff, you're left with about 150, 165 yards and a birdie look. But if you don't, you're going to be lucky to make a bogey on this finishing hole. Alrighty guys, now that we've gone through the course hole by hole, let's go ahead and take a look at our key stats for analysis that I'll be using to identify my top plays of the week. So at number 1, we've got shots gained off the tee, which might be a little bit surprising considering that number 2, we've got ourselves shots gained approach. But around this track, you've got to keep it in play, and you've also got to be able to take advantage of the gettable holes, which that drivable par 4 comes to mind, and those 4 par 5s, which are reachable by some of the elite tier long guys off the tee. That's where you start to make your birdies. And on pretty much every other hole, par's a good score. So I'm looking for off the tee players that can keep themselves out of that water, but also set up those birdie looks. And number 2, we've got shots gained approach, right? Typically number 1 on this list. I would say most people would classify TPC Sawgrass, the players, as a second shot golf course, where if you can hit the greens, keep yourself out of trouble, you're going to have a relatively good week. And I, of course, would agree with that. The stats back it up. And in fact, if you look at some of the correlation data over the last few years, shots gained off the tee and shots gained approach are by far the most important stats. So that's why they're there at number 1 and 2 respectively. And finally, though, at number 3, you've got shots gained around the green, which might be a little bit surprising, right? Usually around the green, not the most important stat, particularly like looking at fantasy scoring, right? And some of those type of metrics. But if you look at the guys that have won here, Rory, JT, Cam Smith, Hideki, I mean, Tiger Woods, Matt Kuchar, Siwoo Kim even, all players that have a more than adequate short game and are some of them, especially like JT, Rory, some of the more recent champions, Hideki, Cam Smith, right? Maybe the best around the green player in the world, are known for their creativity around the green, and specifically are good around the green players on Bermuda grass. So I think if you're looking for top end upside, you not only have to be checking the box from the execution standpoint, but you've also got to be able to save yourself because you are inevitably going to get into trouble, right? There's water to be had around here. You're going to have to pitch out sideways and be scrambling for a par. The around the green shots, some of the most difficult on the PGA Tour. So when you're getting into contention, right, the guys that actually end up hoisting the trophy at the end of the week are the ones that can save themselves when they actually get into those situations. So lots of issues with looking around the green. It's a volatile stat, a little bit hard to understand for some of you guys out there when it comes to shots gained, but it is important when you're looking at this top tier field. A few other key stats I'm considering would be par 5 scoring because there's some of the more gettable holes on property. I'm taking a look at shots gained approach out of Bermuda rough, taking a look at shots gained during the Florida swing, and of course, shots gained at our comp courses, which we're going to get into right now. And for our number 1 comp, we've got ourselves East Lake Golf Club, a difficult ball striking test with Bermuda tip to toe, which I know it's an overseed this week, so it's a little bit different, but still similar from, a lot of different facets, especially from the ball striking perspective, where at both courses, being an elite player off the tee and on approach is an absolute must-have. So when you take a look at the leaderboards, I mean, Rory McIlroy, right, a prolific winner at both events. Tiger Woods has made, a habit of winning around both tracks. And if you look at the top 5, top 10, there's just crossover galore. So definitely just, from the stat perspective, from the leaderboard perspective, I think there's a lot of crossover, but also having walked both golf courses, when you're missing there, it's a lot of the same penalty off the tee, right? There's not quite as much water at East Lake. There's definitely water in play, but not nearly as much as the players, but those dense forest areas, right, where you're missing into them, Quail Hollow's the same kind of way, you're chipping out sideways. There's no way to hit a recovery shot and get it close to the green. It's a similar style of golf where execution and pure ball striking gets it done. So that's why it's there at number 1 for the Tour Championship. Next up, we've got Bay Hill Club and Lodge. Last week's event, right? Florida golf, Bermuda tip to toe, water all over the place, and also a difficult ball striking test. So that one shouldn't be a surprise. You probably saw that one coming from a mile away. Number 3, we've got PGA National, another Florida course, right, for the Honda Classic. Bermuda tip to toe, difficult track. You got the windy conditions down here in South Florida. And once again, right, water volatility all over the place. Pretty much checking every single box. So like the last few weeks, right, we've talked about, TPC Sawgrass as one of our top comps. Not a surprise, I'm going right back to those. And then, of course, at number 1, maybe a little bit different was East Lake. A lot of that just comes to the crossover, on the leaderboards. And then just that ball striking difficulty, which is commonplace across all three of these tracks. All right, fellas, that is all I've got for this week's course breakdown. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared for going out there, getting ready to make your DFS lineups, cash out some of those outright bets. So best of luck whatever you guys decide to go with this week. I'll be on course for the Pro-Am on Wednesday, so make sure to check out the live stream Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern, where I'll cover what I saw out there, right? Any changes that I see from last year's event, and we'll go into the DFS and prop preview here for Thursday and the rest of the week. So looking forward to it. I'll have core plays coming out this afternoon, value plays as well, maybe a little bit later on this evening, and all of the content as per usual coming out Monday and Tuesday before the event, because early Wednesday, I've got to get my butt up there to Ponte Vedra. It's quite the drive up there, so we'll be doing so, getting out there for the Pro-Am and getting ready to crush this week. Last week was definitely a good one for us, ended up being profitable for DFS and for props, and paid for our trip. So let's do it again. Let's make it an easy one on our wallets. Best of luck out there to all of you, and hit that like button before you get on out of here. And also, go ahead and comment down below what you think the winning score is going to be. I think the winning score is probably going to be a little bit better than what we saw last year. Weather was a huge factor there. There's supposed to be a little bit of rain over the weekend, but I'm going to take 16 under par. I'll be a little bit more positive about it. I think somebody goes out there, kind of tortures the place. But go ahead and let me know your thoughts down there in the comments. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so you don't miss any of that content when it drops. And let's get this cash, fellas.